the Middle-Aged Bodcast. Getting older, but having some laughs.
Welcome to the Middle-Aged Podcast with me, Raging Rich.
And me, T.A. Shalano.
And T.A., it is a guest episode today.
That's right, Rich. I'm delighted to say for the third consecutive season, we have a guest joining us from the USA.
We do indeed. We are joined today by Brian Hall, an author who writes about tech, stepping away from tech, and feeling your feelings. Brian, welcome to the Middle-Aged Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's always interesting to speak to different guests, and we've had a few American guests now, so you're following the path of a few others that have gone before now.
Boldly.
Acting like we're international podcasters. But yeah, do you want to sort of kick us off with a bit about you, the things that sort of you do around sort of physical, mental health, etc., and your sort of life in like the rural south of the US?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll start with why I'm here, why I reached out and said, hey, I would like to come talk to you on your podcast. And it's because I saw that you speak about mental health issues, and particularly with an eye toward men. Not that they don't apply to everyone, but we kind of give ourselves an extra hard time of it, in my opinion. And so I've written a little book on the topic. It's in beta right now, which means it's not finished. It's got rough edges. It's also free to read, seeking feedback. And so I thought maybe I go plug this book and see if some people want to give me feedback on it, talk to these gentlemen who are brave enough to talk about these issues. And it's a little outside my normal lane, I guess. I've worked in quote unquote tech for the last 10 years, mostly website experimentation stuff. We could talk about that, but I think it puts most people to sleep, so no requirement.
It wouldn't put me to sleep, Brian.
Okay, I mean, it is fascinating. And it is related to the stuff about your emotions and mental health, 100%. But you know how it is, that you get a little too technical and you can just watch people's eyes glaze over. So we'll see how that goes. But I've written in that space quite a lot. And the book about feelings, it kind of came about in a flurry of, I guess, thinking about as I get old, what younger me could have used, what I wish I could have been told by somebody, if I could go back and tell myself what I would say. And so it's just this book that kind of doesn't fit in with my catalog or my day-to-day, but it's important to me. And I finally in 2026 thought, all right, I need to get out there. I need to be brave and talk to some people about this stuff. So here I am.
I mean, I think it's quite an interesting thing to do as well, is to veer off into something completely different. To write about as well. I'm not sure. I mean, again, obviously, writing from a different angle from my own fiction. I'm not sure in terms of like trying to write something like this actually is a whole different perspective, really. I mean, sort of what experience then are you sort of drawing on in the writing of the book from your own life as such?
It's a lot of just direct experience, or well, two things. One is in the quest that I undertook to answer my wife's very valid complaint that I'm not in touch with my feelings, I came across this one particular resource that I found so helpful. And it's just an academic paper by this guy from the early 1900s, I think. It's not particularly well known or famous, but it was a really helpful framework. And I just all made sense to me and started me down the journey. And so the book is one part saying, hey, look at this useful framework by this random guy that I found on the internet. And the other part is, here was my experience of trying to understand these feelings in myself and trying to find my own blind spots. It's a really hard thing to do, in the hopes that other people could have a slightly easier time of it than me.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few struggles with my mental health recently, and one of the things that we have, it's becoming more of a prominent thing here in the UK now, is men's mental health. It's becoming more of a talking point for people. It's been something certainly over here that's been kind of shied away from, and it's something that's not really being spoken about. Now it's getting more conversational, and there's a lot of groups around here. We've mentioned that I attend Andy's Man Club every week, which is a fantastic charity here. There's also groups like Men Walking and Talking, where people meet up in different parts of the UK, and they'll go on a walking route, and they'll just be able to talk about what's bothering them and sort of give each other support in that sort of way. Is there anything like that in the US that you know of? Is there anything kind of as a support network for men, or just sort of what's the conversation like for mental health with men in the US sort of compared to over here?
It's a really good question. As TA mentioned, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. I live in rural South Georgia, and so there's really nothing here of any sort like that. I suppose in the cities, honestly, the last time I lived in a city, there wasn't much in that way either. I joined one online community that was started by a friend of mine, another tech guy who pivoted, and he wanted to do a mental health startup. And so he started it as a community, and we'd bring in speakers, and it was for men. It was actually sparked by his brother's suicide. So it almost takes something that immense to get people to bring up the topic, would be my perspective. So that's why I'm here on the internet talking to you about it. Honestly, it's not really something that has a lot of outlets around me.
Well, that's quite interesting because, like you say, some of the ones here, as we've said, they are becoming more prominent, but they're still very spaced out. There's a lot of places that aren't really running them. I mean, we've already said we live in Birmingham, UK. We live quite close to Birmingham, and there's not really any groups in Birmingham, which is crazy, really, when you think about it. And you think of other big cities in the UK where there are groups available. So yeah, it's a shame, really, that there's not that support for people everywhere, really.
I mean, for sense of scale, how many kind of people live in your local area as such?
Okay, brace yourself. 1,500.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's that. So you don't expect there to be much of anything.
And is it a case that a lot of people know each other in that community still, or with the way the modern world has gone, is it still quite, is it like times gone by where you knew your neighbours more, or has it moved on and it is more isolating? How have you found that?
That's such a good question, and I'm not sure how much responsibility to take for this, but my wife and I moved here a couple of years ago, and we've met most of our neighbors, and people mostly keep to themselves. But I will say there's not really a third place here. It's one of these small towns that probably had 10 times the population several decades ago. And then for whatever reason, people migrated to the cities. And so there's not much in the way of infrastructure to facilitate meeting, random chance encounters, things like that. It's pretty tough. There's a lot of old families who've known each other forever, and there's not a lot of opportunity to break in and get to know people. We take some baked goods to the neighbors or some eggs, and that's how we've gotten to know people. But it's pretty limited. It's a little isolating out here, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, to know how you'd approach that, even, because then there must be people within your community that would probably benefit from, some kind of support networking, perhaps, but who might be isolated. But it's how you'd particularly identify, I suppose, and make that work in a sort of small community. I mean, sort of what inspired you moving there? Because I think you said you'd obviously lived in, more populated sort of city areas before. Was there an inspiration for moving to a rural area?
Yeah, for sure. It was March 2020 when we decided to move to a rural area. So it was very beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, and we looked around at leadership and we thought, this doesn't look like it's going to be handled particularly well. And so we wanted to have a bit more control over the air we breathe, I guess. And so it was that, but we got out here and we started growing some food, very limited scale, but little kitchen garden. And then my wife started raising chickens, and we actually really like this lifestyle. We eat really good. We have fresh air, outdoor activity, all of these things that are important for physical and mental health just kind of come with the lifestyle. So we've stuck around. Of course, companionship, friendship, relationships, these are important as well. And yeah, they're a little harder to come by.
When you moved then, were you used to much more, obviously more people around,
Yeah.
but you then hadn't got this countryside, you hadn't got now, like you say, this different kind of world of growing your own sort of food and having animals. So is it sort of somehow finding that balance then between, the two things? Because I've heard the COVID scenario from even people in the UK who took those options to move out of places like London and go to sort of Wales or countryside locations if they could do so to work and stuff. And then I have heard examples of people then moving back, where maybe because of the reasons that you might be talking about there, where they like elements of it, but then they miss certain things where there's not the same access to the same number of people, or whether it's entertainment type things like shows or things that are on your doorstep when you live in a more city area. So it's interesting to have that balance. And it's obviously neither Rich or I have ever lived in a rural area. So it's interesting to sort of get a perspective from somebody who's done both. Do you have a preference? Is it what you're doing now, or is there a part of you that could see yourself moving back to a more city location?
Yeah, I think we may have overshot a bit. Let me tell you what I got wrong here. I was convinced that there were a lot of other people like us who were able to work remotely, who would really want what we have in terms of space and the ability to grow some food. And I thought inside of a few years, post 2020, that I thought we were just ahead of the curve and that people would start showing up from our generation-ish, similar ideas, and that we would have that community. And I think if we had, I don't know, half a dozen families around us, like-minded enough, I think that would be sufficient. But we don't. I was wrong. That never happened. It's not a thing as far as I can tell. So I do think maybe a small town is about the ideal for me. I do want my food to come from nearby. Once you've had a taste of that, it's hard to go back, I think. So whether that's our own backyard or community garden down the road, any place that can support that would be the ideal. Or we can just try to market this place and get some people to move here. But I don't know. It's a tough sell.
I'm just wondering, because I know it's, what you sort of done, Brian. I have heard examples of that over here where people have definitely gone down that route of growing their own food and moving out into sort of more rural places. And perhaps, as you say, trying to build that community. I wonder to some degree, because of, and it's hard for us when we live in a much smaller country, but the scale of the US, I'm wondering if there are actually more people like yourself, but perhaps they're maybe more dotted around than maybe here, where there are a more limited number of options, which maybe naturally increases the number of people going together. That's where I'm, again, it's hard to, because the scale is so much different between, the sort of the UK and the US, that I'm kind of imagining that there may be people like sort of you dotted around different parts of the States. And, there's obviously so many different types of place, I think, as well in the US, isn't it? The change between, kind of the different states and the coasts and all sorts. So it's so vast. It's hard because we can go pretty much from one end of the country to the other quite quickly, even, by car or whereas like you got to fly or, so that's a totally different dynamic. I wonder if there's maybe something around that.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And thank you. You did me a kindness there. I said that I got this wrong and it never happened. The truth is, this is an enormous country with 350 million people or so. It could be that a couple million people did exactly what we did, but they're so dispersed that none of them landed nearby. And I wouldn't necessarily know it. Surely we're not literally the only ones. So I think you're right. The scale is relevant too, I'm realizing, when I say I want my food to come from nearby. What I mean is I don't want my food to come from California, which is 3 or 4 days drive, which is sort of the standard, or imported from South America, or what. The food at the grocery store comes from a plane flight away. It's a little bit different if we were in a small country where far away means a couple towns up. Completely different dynamic. So yeah, things are weird over here, man. They're so big. They're so spread out. They're so very infused with chemicals and machinery. It's sort of tough to reason about.
I mean, how would you sort of compare then now in terms of from the sort of the physical and mental health situation then of being in the rural location, aside from it being such a small sort of place, but how do you feel in that sense compared to, living in the city? Do you feel the benefits of, cleaner air and, access to more open spaces, things like that? Have you kind of considered the impact on your life?
Yeah, I'll stop short of generalizing or giving advice to everyone out there in the world, but I can definitely say for me in the city, the things that I did for my mental health or comfort seemed more like, taking a pill because you have a headache, versus out here it feels more like eliminating the source of the headache. The just regular practice of being outside, bending, reaching, digging in the dirt, pulling weeds, spreading mulch, all of that just automatically having time outdoors in nature, under tree cover, and the physical labor of it. Compared with, say, in the city, I would be maybe going to a workout, to a gym, to do a 1-hour workout, to get that out of the way, to get that done. And then maybe in the evening, I would drink some margaritas to unwind. It sure feels like it just threads into the natural flow of life a little better out here versus being consumer experiences that I pick and choose based on my state. I mean, maybe that's not for everyone, but it is just a lot easier. You don't have to think about it as much when it just becomes part of your day to day.
And then I suppose there's the pace of life within that comparison as well, isn't there? Where if you are in a place that's sort of more going at a high speed tempo with everyone sort of rushing around, and you move to somewhere where there's less people, and it's just, they often talk about it here, don't they? The countryside or whatever, it's a slower pace of life, maybe naturally can slow you down a little bit in a way that you wouldn't when you're in those environments. And again, I suppose the thing around having things like chickens, how has that sort of led you into embracing that environment? Is not something you'd obviously do in the city. I mean, how have you kind of found that as an experience? Yeah,
they're great. The pace of life is great. The chickens are great. They'll bring you to the present moment anytime you pay attention to them. They're so dumb, but they're so funny, and they're just pecking and scratching and clucking and hopping, and that's it. That's what they do. And you take a second of your day to just train your focus on them, and everything else kind of falls away. And, I don't know. I mean, we are on the middle-aged Bodcast, so were I much younger, this would be probably a very different conversation. But at this age, the pace of life, the quiet, all the sunshine, it definitely feels right. I don't know if I was ready to appreciate it in my 20s necessarily, but being out here and happily married, yeah, man, you can't beat it.
It is something I think that does, no matter where you live in the world, I think it is that case, isn't it? The city, it's always got that kind of pace, and especially with sort of the office jobs and things like that. And certainly, as you mentioned, working in tech, I think that like tech is such a fast-paced industry as well, and the things that are constantly changing. I mean, I'm thinking of like this week even, I can't remember what the software was called, but there's a new AI video generator that's come out that Disney and Warner Brothers are all suing because it can generate Superman versus Wolverine in ridiculously good quality and stuff. And it's like, you think about how technology is evolving like that. It's so quick, it's so fast paced. And I can imagine actually being in the countryside and sort of living in that rural area, yes, you've still got your technology and you've still got those things going on, but it's not like everything is just hitting you all the time.
Yeah.
You have the chance, as you say, to be outside, getting in there with the chickens, collecting eggs and digging and all the stuff you were saying. And do you find that's really sort of the positive on your mental health? I'm guessing that's sort of the thing that's giving you that calmness in life, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. The last couple of years in tech have been just so frustrating and disappointing for me. I realize different people have had a different experience of it, but I have not had a great time of it. And I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't shut the laptop and walk out the back door and go dig a hole or pull up some carrots or fuss at the chickens. Yeah, it is. It's quite a luxury to have that immediate access to the space and to nature. It makes me wonder what we can do to get that for more people. Because I don't think you have to live in a town of 1,500 to have that. There are other ways to get it, but I realized I was really lacking in that for much of my life.
I'm just trying to imagine me and you running after chickens, Rich. I can see that'd be quite a comic scene for us, wouldn't it?
It will humble you.
A really, really bad recreation of the scene in Rocky, wouldn't it?
Oh, when he does his training, yeah. Oh, of course, yeah. Oh, dear me. Have you named the chickens?
We named our first batch, and chickens don't live that long. They live, I guess, a few years typically. And so we lost some beloved chickens. And so for the second batch, we decided, okay, they'll just have epithets. That's adventure chicken. That's angry chicken. And we left it at that to try to form less of a bond, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose if they've got names, it's more of a connection then, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, we had Justin and Brittany, and Justin was such a special chicken. And we cried and cried when Justin died. And so I maybe we're trying to spare ourselves that.
I was waiting for you to tell us you'd got Christina as well. And Christina and Brittany used to fight over Justin was what I was waiting for. I think was the gist of that one.
Well, obviously, we spoke a little bit there about the tech and things. Can you tell us a bit about your writing with the tech world and sort of stepping away from that world a little bit? And I suppose what kind of things were driving you prior to the move, and how have you kind of found that balance with obviously being able to work from home and do things like that, but also embracing kind of your old life in a way? What kind of things from there did you used to write about, and what kind of things have you sort of applied to where you are now, and what kind of things have you thought, actually, you know what, I don't need some of that in my life now?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. I decided to write a book because I was a teacher for a long, long time. And I probably still would be a teacher if I could make a decent living at it here, but that's not really the way we compensate that profession, alas. So I got into tech. I was a front-end engineer and then got into more of the experimentation strategy and analytics stuff. And I wrote a book just about that. After 6 or 7 years of doing A/B tests on websites every day, I had the thought, why don't I just put everything I know into a slim little volume, and it costs $15, and anyone who needs it can have it. And so that's very much the tech guy writing a tech book about tech stuff for tech people. That was how I started. And I guess I got interested in other topics, more personal topics, once I got that one out of me. I guess I kind of honed my writing chops a bit and felt a little more capable of writing on broader topics. And I'm realizing this too. I've started writing the book about feelings a couple of years ago. And I think that was the beginning of I'll just say it. We are in this massive hype cycle around large language models. It started, a few years back. And I think maybe me diverging and thinking, no, I'm going to write about feeling your feelings was a bit of, I don't want to talk about that stuff. I'm already bored by it. Let me do something else. And so that was that project. And then I took a long break. And then the recent project that I've picked up as well is telling people's stories for, you might call it conscious tech usage or D-tech movement or something like that. I'm curious about that transition that people make where, you go from one day you're using all tech, everything, staring at your phone for 6 hours a day to maybe you picked up a pencil and paper and now you journal instead. Or maybe you got off of Google and you're using some little bootstrapped small tech company run by a couple of people. I'm collecting these stories for a future book. And so, yeah, it's been a coping mechanism, honestly. I went from being all in it to wanting another place to exercise my mind and writing chops and another place to focus. So that has been my journey. I'll turn the question back, if I may, though. After having written a book, does it expand what you might want to do next within fiction? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does actually. I think that's probably a similar thing for a lot of people, actually, whether it's fiction or not, because once you've kind of been through the process, I think you start to think about, well, what would I do differently next time? And so in terms of my latest project that's still relatively early stages, I'm trying to write it in a slightly different way, different tense, and challenge myself around the telling of a story, not in the third person, but in the first person. And so again, almost trying to take it more from one character's perspective rather than looking in on the story, which I think from what I'm finding is a more difficult thing to do. But for me, it's that part of that evolution. It's like you're talking about you in a roundabout way, you either want to explore different topics or different ways of doing something as part of your development. I mean, obviously we're talking about it from writing books, but I suppose that applies to a lot of things that you could look at and say, well, I've done that. What else could I do with that? I guess. I mean, the thing I haven't done is switch topics. Obviously you switched sort of topics as such, which is a different, different sort of experience really. So yeah, I obviously don't know about that side of it so much, but yeah, I understand the bit about testing yourself and trying to do something, at least, even if it's a similar thing to you've done, but doing it differently. I mean, on the tech side of things, I mean, what advice would you give to someone who's, wants to reduce their exposure or, be more present, be more in the moment?
I'll have I guess in a year, my answer will be, go read my book. And in the meantime, I share the kind of work in progress. I've got a framework in mind. Well, before I even get into the details, though, just good for you, I guess, is the first thing I would say. That's not advice, but celebrate and appreciate yourself for caring in the first place, whether it's because you care about your own mental health and you realize that you're staring at this little rectangle for 6 hours a day and it's bad, or because you care maybe about the effect on everyone. Good for you. Good for you. Feel good about that. And then be patient with yourself, because these apps are engineered by very smart people working very hard with very huge salaries to suck you in and addict you and keep you coming back. The deck's stacked against you. So go into it knowing that. That's my first piece of advice. But from there, trying to be a little more encouraging, I would say divide and conquer. You're not going to flip a switch and tomorrow you just don't use tech and you're enlightened and hovering 6 inches off the ground all day long. It's going to be a process. And so one thing at a time, one app or habit or platform at a time. And for each one, I think you can tackle it. There's a bit of a hierarchy of moves you might make, changes you might make. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just an order to go through as you consider how you want to change it. So the first thing I'd say is, can you just stop? So assuming you've identified a habit, a product, an app, something that doesn't feel great, is it an option just to stop using it? Sometimes the answer is yes. Some people just quit Instagram and feel great about that. And if you can, you can, and go for it and forgive yourself if you backslide. But that's the first and maybe best option if it is an option. And then from there, if not, that's okay. Can you get what you were getting from the app but using analog or offline tools. So the example of using a journal for writing or for to-do management, or maybe for your calendar. If you're currently using apps for those and you don't like the company that makes the apps, you don't like the experience of the apps, they've added a bunch of new features that get on your nerves, whatever. Can you just go offline? Can you just go to paper? Can you use a analog clock instead of your phone for a clock? All of these little changes start to add up. So I would go through that sequence of questions, just one habit at a time, one annoying platform at a time, and celebrate wins along the way.
It's true though, isn't it? I mean, I went to dinner at my parents' last night and they had the radio on. They're not there listening to music on a streaming service. The radio's on.
Yeah.
It's playing sort of songs from the 70s, the 80s. And that's so much better sometimes. And like putting a CD into a player and listening, sometimes that is so much better. I found when I was listening more to the streaming stuff, I wasn't listening to full albums. I was just going, I'll make a playlist. I'll put all my favourite songs by someone on it and listen to it. And then I realised I'm not listening to albums anymore. So I've gone back to actually putting CDs on to listening to those. And it's just, you get a much better experience, both in terms of you're listening to things the way it's intended by the person who's created it, but also you're not kind of constantly thinking, I don't like this one, I'll skip it. I don't like this.
Exactly.
You're not talking to a speaker telling it to change. You're just listening to it and enjoying it.
So this is great. This is a great example of analog, right? You're not going to give up music, but can you go analog? And the answer is absolutely. Yeah. Records, CDs, radio. Delightful tactile experience, much more immersive. I'm a big fan. We have a record player downstairs, and when we go to a thrift store, we just pick up a couple weird old records. Delightful. I'm curious if you ever had the experience, Rich, when you were in streaming mode, Spotify, whatever, where you take your phone out of your pocket to change the track, and before you know it, you're in another app and you're scrolling or you're responding to messages and you didn't intend to. You were just going to change the song. Yeah. Okay. I see you nodding. Yeah.
100%. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think, and you've said it right there, it's not just about using the tech for that one purpose. You're drawn into everything. And like you said before, it is to just get you constantly on those platforms. You're not actually getting anything from it. They talk now about how YouTube has overtaken some of the TV stations here in the UK. And you think, yeah, but some of I mean, don't get me wrong. I think some of the stuff on YouTube that people create, some of it is really good, but it's not that's not a majority, I don't think, of things. I think there's a lot of people who do stuff that isn't as good as what you get on television. I mean, the television side of things now is starting to take a hit. And it does make you wonder, has all this technology, have the things like YouTube, TikTok, and all those kind of things, because people's attention is taken on them, people are spending less time on television. Are people just changing their habits slightly?
I guess this might just be an old person thing to say. I'm comfortable with that if that's the case. But to have space for ambitious artistic projects like a double concept album or a mini series that goes into all the intricate details of some obscure historical event, I think we as a people want to keep that space open and allow people to come in and make things that surprise and delight us. And I think for sure that the algorithmic feed of short form addictive content is a move away from that. And I do hate to see it. And again, not judging anybody, because it is quite addictive. It really, truly is. It's not your weakness that makes you want to scroll, but the resistance, I think, is important. It's important to train whatever muscle it is that allows you to do something other than that.
I think the addiction thing is the addiction element of it is an interesting thing, because they're now obviously talking about, I think Australia were first around, getting under 16s off social media and, not having the phones at school and all this kind of thing. It's almost, you start to feel like it's going to become one of those things that but in a different way, it will be a bit like smoking, where decades ago, so many people, smoking was everywhere and, high percentage of the population. Then until people can obviously sort of, the negative health effects come through. I'm wondering in a sort of roundabout way if the same thing is going to happen with things like tech, because, inadvertently, like you say, when you gave a good example there with the playlist and you get drawn into something else, whether it's an app or answering messages, it's a constant distraction, isn't it? And I read somewhere that one of the issues with it, apart from how addictive it is, which again, things like smoking were obviously very addictive as well, beyond the health issues, is that it lowers your attention span. So when you were talking about creative projects where you would sit and listen to, a long album or watch, a long running sort of TV program or film, people's attention spans are being lowered by constant short flip content and keep, looking at phones, blah, blah, blah. They're not able to hold the same level of attention that they would have been 10, 20, 30 years ago, etc. And so the impact of that, and the younger you start with that, I suppose, the worse that's going to be. So I think that there's actually a real health impact to it as well, isn't there? In that sense, potentially, that it's having an impact on your brain that you won't really recognize, perhaps until maybe further down the line, studies are going to say this is what it's actually doing.
Yeah, I think we don't know. I think we're in many realms. We're in the space of we don't know the long-term effects of this, and I guess we'll find out and hope that it's not terrible. For sure. I think, and this ties into the book about feelings, actually. Like I warned you I was going to come on here and try to talk about all of our feelings. So I think a very challenging thing to do, but something that can help with this is to identify what are we getting from scrolling? And I don't think it's one answer for everybody. I'll go first, but I would love it if each of you would be willing to reflect a bit on whatever your kind of drug of choice is when it comes to digital entertainment scrolling. I think for me, I reach for maybe a Twitter feed because I want to know, and this is kind of messed up, but here it is. I want to know that there are other people who are disgusted by the things I'm disgusted by, who are outraged about the things that I am outraged about, because perhaps I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. I want to remind myself and prove to myself, look, these people get it. They see it. They're with me. They think this stuff is trash too. And that is how I get into kind of, I don't even know if it's doom scrolling, but it's definitely pointless scrolling mode. It's that. And if I'm ever going to have a chance of not just doing that unconsciously for hours and hours, I need to find another way to meet that need, I guess. And so I'll say I have good days and bad days, but this being right here with you today to have this conversation is me trying to counteract my compulsive desire to scroll. Because now I can say, hey, you know what? Rich and TA, there's a couple people that I know that see some of the same things I see, share some of the concerns that I have. And if I know that, I don't have to go scroll Twitter for an hour to remember it. So that's my own little self-diagnosis and attempt at intervention. If either of you is brave enough to talk a bit about, okay, when you go and you find yourself mindlessly scrolling, what are you trying to get? No judgment.
That's a really interesting question, actually. I used to be a really big wrestling fan.
Mm-hmm.
And not so much now, but certainly a few years ago. And yet I barely watch it now. And yet I'm still on the internet every single day after a show's been on, checking the results, then going on Twitter to see what people think about it, going on this forum to see what people think about it, going on to all these different social things. And you sort of think to yourself, well, why am I doing that? What's it really telling me? It's just telling me a lot of people are saying, oh, that was crap. But then someone else goes, oh, well, it was really good. And then they have a row over it and stuff. And you think it's really pointless in many ways. And I know TA's probably got something in mind as well. But the one thing that has helped me in recent weeks, I've actually been reading the book of somebody we're going to be talking to later on this season. and I've been reading their book as I've been commuting to work, and I have found I haven't been picking up my phone. My mind was so focused on the reading and being like properly drawn into that. I wasn't going, oh, I'll just go and check this. I'll just go and, and that was something I found interesting.
Yeah, I think it's you made the point there as well, Brian, around coming to do this as an example where, obviously we're talking about tech, but without tech, there's absolutely no way that we can be sat here on the opposite side of the world talking to you. So it is reusing it in another way. And I think that's an interesting thing, is how you change your relationship with it as well. Because if all people do is the doom scroll, the short clip, and then they're not getting even the benefit of doing something. So whereas for this, whether it's recording with guests or when it's just Rich and I, or we're preparing for guests, I have to sit down and think. And going back to some of your earlier things, I do still write things down with pen and paper and stuff as well, which, showing my age, I suppose. But one of the things I enjoy doing in preparation for episodes is we often do doing research, and I refuse to let AI do it. Rich will tell you, I still go and do it old school, researching guests, things like that. So I've had a look. We'll come to it in a second, but I've had a look at what your beta read and things like that. And I go into those kind of things and then write that. And I feel like I'm using my brain again, but I'm still using and preparing something that's on tech for something that's going to be done using tech, but feel like you're then getting more of a benefit from it. The negative side from my point of view that I would bring in at the moment is in terms of the having done the books, is I find myself on platforms sort of like TikTok, seeing what everybody else is kind of doing, independent authors, what are they saying, who's got tips on what's working, what isn't working, what's people's advice, and you kind of get drawn into that. Sometimes that can be helpful in terms of somebody might have really good tips for how you would present something or outline your book to a prospective reader. But other times it can be quite negative, of people moaning about things are not going very well, or they're moaning about the fact that this isn't working in so I don't know. And then you get drawn into that. And the problem with that balance is when it's the time you spend doing that versus the time you should be spending on your next book or doing something as well. So that's where I sometimes think, say I hadn't got enough time to do that today. And then if I think back and went, yeah, but you probably lost an hour doing that. You could have put that away and spent an hour doing something towards writing the next book. So it's that balance. And you feel guilty then that if you're wasting the time. That's my reflection on it. That sometimes it makes you feel that about it. But then that creates almost an anxiety of, you've let yourself down by wasting that time, has not actually given you something that's productive. And I mean, one of the things I've talked about on the show before, Rich knows, and I'm going to another one this Sunday, is I go to a writer's retreat. And that's where you literally go, and obviously, you can use tech, but it's to do your project, and you kind of step out for a few hours and you purely focus on that in a room with other people working on their own projects. And then there's like a bit of lunch and people chat. And that I find is a great way of disciplining yourself to do something and getting that break in a roundabout way. Like you say, to go out into the yard with the chickens. That's my version of that, being able to go and do that for a few hours, which I wouldn't do if I was at home. I would be more likely to be doom scrolling or doing something else. So it's then allowing yourself as well to take that time to do something. And I think that's what we're getting less and less of as time is going on. I think people are losing their time to things that aren't as productive.
I hear a couple of common threads through what we all just said. One of them is, on some level, there's a seeking connection that's going on, it sounds like. I want to know what other people have said about this wrestling match. I want to know how other people are going about writing their books or marketing their books or whatever it is. And then there's also just the, enthrallment or flow. There's just the state of when you're just really in the novel and you're just flipping pages and everything else disappears. And I guess what I'd say is the guilt part, I really get it, Tia. I have felt that too. Why did I spend so long wasting time? I had 3 things to do today and they're still not done. It's 4 p.m. What is wrong with me? I guess the challenge, easier said than done, is instead just to get curious and say, well, I don't know. What is wrong with me? What was I looking for? How did I feel? What was going on inside me when I reached for my phone instead of the thing I wanted to work on? And for me, a lot of the time, it's about fear. It's about imposter syndrome, or the worry that, I won't do a good job, or I don't know how to start. And if I can just air that out, a lot of times that's all it takes. If I can just acknowledge, okay, hey, I don't know where to start. So what I'll do is journal about where to start. And now I'm doing it instead of doom scrolling. Again, easier said than done. But the question of just what's going on inside me that sparks these sessions is maybe the healthy spin on guilt.
Yeah, I think that's very valid point.
You focused on 8 key emotions.
Yeah.
In your beta read of joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, anger, and anticipation.
Mm-hmm.
You said that mastering the feeling of these emotions will improve confidence, calmness, and composure, which will make you more effective. Tell us more about what recognizing and mastering these emotions has meant for you.
Thanks. Sure. And I don't know if I can say I've mastered, actually, but we'll talk about the quest, the attempts, the ongoing process of mastery. I think that we're all animals. We're all mammals. And in fact, these emotions are things that you see exhibited in other mammals, not just humans. And so in the same way that, let's say you've committed to getting in shape, you want to get stronger, you would probably not embark on an exercise routine that has you doing push-ups and shoulder presses, but you never do a squat and you never do a pull-up. That would throw you way out of balance. You would probably have health problems after a while. In the same way, we're meant to feel all of these emotions. And all of us are probably pretty good at feeling a few, and all of us probably struggle with a few others. And so what it's been for me, it's definitely made it easier in my closest relationship, right? I'm married, and coming to understand some of the feelings that I am not even aware of, but that my wife is aware of when I'm feeling them, has made me honestly less of a jerk and a better partner. And it's also it's given me the ability to be a little kinder to myself, take better care of myself, understand what I need a little better. I will say it's probably a little easier to resist your doom scrolling habit when you're in touch with these emotions, right? It's kind of what we've been talking about a bit with, if you have this compulsive scrolling habit, which almost everyone does, what sparks it? What's going on? What are you looking for? It's probably rooted in some sort of an emotional need. So for me, it's been that I'm, you'll have to take my word for it, but I'm less of a jerk today than I was a few years ago when I started reading and really trying to practice the awareness of what's going on inside me.
That would have been a great moment where sort of Brian's wife comes onto the show and goes, he's lying.
We can make that happen.
I'm sure she wouldn't. I'm sure she'd say it's the truth.
She's very
I
patient.
think the doom scrolling thing, though, is there's an element of, it's the dopamine, isn't it?
Yeah.
That constant.
Well, I think it's not even just the doom scrolling, it's everything now in sort of tech. When you look at sort of your chat GPT and all these other generative AI things out there, people are using it and they're literally just doing absolute nonsense with it. What happens when they turn around? Because I think eventually it will be, well, now it's all under a paywall. And then what's the next thing that's going to be given to people? Because I think that's what it is, isn't it? Everything with technology, it's evolving all the time. And at the moment, the AI stuff's become the big thing. And don't get me wrong, I think we've all said it. There are some benefits to certain things it can do, I'm sure, but it's taking away creativity. It's taking away things that you would do yourself and think about, and instead you're just going, oh yeah, great, I can do that now. and you do find people are still using it and sort of acting like it's the greatest thing in the world. But what happens when the next thing comes out? What happens when we suddenly find ourselves just going, well, what do we do now?
Yeah, let's go there. Actually, we've talked about doom scrolling. I think everyone has a clear picture of what that experience is and how it's so very addictive. I myself am not a user of large language models like ChatGPT, etc. But my understanding is that the experience, and Tia, you mentioned dopamine, which it's so important, and I'm no expert, but it's important to understand that there are chemical triggers in your brain that can be manipulated and make it very hard for you to control your behavior. I believe there's some of that going on with chatbot sessions as well.
Mm.
Not speaking from experience, but just from my understanding of how this stuff works. You get surprised and delighted. Kind of variable reward, I think, is the terminology for how you optimize the dopamine loop in a product. Not everything you do has a predictable outcome. Not everything has a satisfying outcome, but sometimes they do, but you don't know when. It sounds to me like it describes spending an hour or two talking to a chatbot, probably. So it's kind of like productivity coded activity, but I do think it's sort of the same escape for a lot of folks as doom scrolling is.
Yeah. And I think we're probably coming towards the end of today's episode. What we ask guests always to sort of reflect, on their episode or anything that they'd particularly like to say. So over to you, Brian, if you want to give us either a recap or any thoughts you'd like to say.
Yeah, thanks for that. Sure. The thing that I keep coming back to is, and I'll be upfront about it, this is a pitch to go read my book and leave some feedback on it. It's free to read. I want to share ideas with people. It's why I'm here. We are human beings. We are mammals on a big watery rock revolving around a ball of fire. We're animals, and emotions are part of being an animal, all of them. And we all have gaps, and we all have kind of as men, an uphill battle to get to grips with all of the feelings that we have. It's worth the effort. It's worth doing, and it will become a superpower. And if you're ever going to win in the battle for your attention, you're going to need all of the awareness you can get. Therefore, go read my book, link in the show notes. How do I do? Is that okay? Can I get away with that?
Very good.
I have had a look at it ahead of this, but I will be having another look at it afterwards.
I appreciate it. Really, I just want to talk I want to talk to men about feelings, and it's weirdly hard to initiate. So thank you both.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Want more middle-aged podcast in your life? Of course you do. Follow us on social media for behind-the-scenes stuff, extra larks, and all our latest updates. We're on Instagram and Threads at Middle-Aged Podcast. Facebook's easier. Just head to facebook.com/middle-aged podcast. If you're still hanging on to Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, we're at Middle-Aged Podcast. And if you're on Blue Sky, it's at middleagedpodcast.bsky.social. Or you can swing by our website, middleagedpodcast.co.uk. Give us a follow and stay in the loop. Cheers for listening.